Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to the first ever Big Data London webinar. I'm Andy Steed, I'm Content Director of Big Data London, and I'm joined here today by Jez Clark, say hello.
Hiya, how you doing?
Susan Walsh.
Hi.
And Dave Mailer.
Hi.
Hello. So it goes without saying today that our thoughts and prayers are with anybody who's been personally affected by the current crisis. However, even professionally, I don't think any of us can remember a period of such sustained disruption. And it's with that in mind, really, that we picked our first webinar topic to be a lockdown special. Some tips and tricks to be thinking about during lockdowns and things that you can be getting on with when perhaps business operations are slow or closed. First up, we have Jez, who's going to be talking about skills. Secondly, we'll have Susan talking about data quality. And thirdly, it will be Dave who'll be talking about how to manage more effectively with working from home and maintaining the social distancing that's been enforced. These sessions are designed to be interactive, so if you have any questions, please fire them in and I'll ask them to the presenters once they've finished presenting. But without further ado, it's time for our first speaker. So Jez, if you'd like to take it away. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Right, so let me just pull up my slides. 1 second. Here we go. Okay, so good afternoon, everybody, and thanks ever so much for attending this webinar. And it's great to be part of something with Big Data London again. As you know, we're one of the exclusive staffing partners to the conference, and it's a privilege for us to kick these webinars off with Andy and the gang and Susan and Dave. Yeah, really interesting and interesting times at the moment, and something that we've never experienced before. So. Yeah, my thoughts also go out to everybody that's involved in this pandemic. It's just one of those things. So I'm going to kick off. I thought the best thing for us to do, really, as it's something we've never seen before, is actually just do a very, very quick market update. So for those, I'll just move on to a bit of a market update on what's going on out there. So, this is the new known at the moment, so we've got to embrace this. But basically, we've got the quickest drop in recruitment activity that we've ever seen since the 2009 financial crisis, and that data is coming from the ONS and the Total Vacancy Index, which is a collection of data from across the UK from various different government bodies, etc., which gives us this data. We know at the moment that from an industry perspective that non-essential retail, travel and hospitality have been hit the hardest. But actually, some of these hiring falls for the private sector, interestingly, have impacted the public sector, where there is a slight rise in certain areas. I think it's interesting when we look at the fall in the vacancies, and that the trend for both permanent requirements and contract requirements has taken exactly the same trend. Normally what we see when, in a market, and whether it's either candidate driven or client driven, what normally happens is there's one or the other. So, permanent requirements pick up and either permanent requirements pick up or contractor requirements pick up, depending on how businesses are spending their money, and whether it's capex or opex, and it's just projects that need done today, or it's for long-term strategy for customers. And what we've seen here is that both permanent and contract has taken a dive at the same time and at the same rates. However, that said, we're a data recruitment company, so hence our thought leadership and our affiliation with Big Data London. From a data perspective, data professionals, data analysts and data scientists still do remain in demand. Even though we have seen it decline, there's a lot around reporting and analytics, which is vital, particularly in this COVID-19 situation. And the more data we can get our hands on and the quicker we can report it in the best way visually, the better we'll be to help us get out of this situation. IR35, as we all know, for the private sector, was introduced, the new regulations around March, but the government has now relaxed on that, which has therefore led to more availability of contractors that, whilst were contracting previously, were looking for permanent requirements before the market took a dip. So that's a bit of a market update, and there will be some links at the back end of this presentation which supports some of the things that I'll say. So what are we seeing? What I mean by that is what's Eden Smith seeing. So what myself, my business partner Matt, Nick, and the gang and the team, what are we seeing in the market? So the increase and the demand for business analysis, data analysis, reporting skills, visualization in the public and private sector is still there. In fact, there's an increase. There's an increase in the private public sector because there needs to be a contingency around, certainly with council boroughs where they're trying to report what's going on in their areas. You know, if people do get sick, what do they do, and what's the contingency for making sure that we're still reporting those analytics to the market? There is a transfer. Some of our customers said there's a transfer from OPEX to CAPEX. So where they had long-term plans to build up their data teams, they may be shifting some of that cash or across into what might be shorter-term projects to help them build a more robust model right now to help them get out of this situation in the next 3, 6, 9 months. So that's definitely happening. We can see that. Some businesses are using the opportunity to actually really look at what they've done with their data strategy to date, what technologies they've put in place, and how they're looking to move forward. So, you know, they might be thinking, well, there could be, you know, it's very, very hard to change the wing of a plane while it's flying. But, you know, some companies where they've come and they've slowed down somewhat, they've now got a bit more time to actually have a rethink. So some companies are doing that at the moment, and therefore there's a lot of inquiry around what's available to them, you know, how can they streamline and get more slick so that when they come out of this situation, and when we all come out of this situation, they'll be in better shape to basically capitalize on any opportunity that there is available for them and all of us. The next section I'd like to talk a little bit more around, because this is something that we did focus on at Big Data London last November, which is workforce planning. There's always typically people gravitate when they need resources to recruitment straight away. But in a situation where, you know, you're kind of slowing down your hiring potentially, there needs to be a refocus on what else can you do to redeploy the skills that you have in your team. And some companies actually right now don't really understand what skills they do have in their teams. And now's a really, really good time to look at the actual capability. So businesses are looking at the capability of the existing people that they have in their organization, and then they look at what they can do to move those people around in the organization. So mobility plays a big part right now. And then also training plays a big part, because actually, you know, where some companies may have been looking for certain skill sets which are high in demand, in a situation like what we have now, actually, you know, there's a good opportunity to look at training. So can we train some of the resources that we've got at the moment, and what's that time frame before we can get them up to speed, as opposed to going out to market to recruit someone? So we see a lot of workforce planning happening at the moment. And, you know, other parts of building pure data talent strategy, or any talent strategy really, involve a lot around succession and branding, looking at the brand internally in an organization. Internship programs play a big part right now because they're very cost effective. There's a lot of greater good in there at the moment, you know, for helping students get up to date with their skills. But also it's a great way to build a team for the future. So, you know, where they might not have the budgets to be hiring right now because of reductions in sales, and, you know, we're all having that impact on our companies. But actually, you know, they might be looking a bit more long term. So internship programs, collaboration with universities and students is a good thing to be looking at the moment, and we're seeing that in the industry at the moment. So what are the skills in demand? We're always looking at this quite closely because I think from our point of view, particularly in data, the market still needs quite a lot of educating around what's available, and there needs to be a lot more alignment with businesses and the community, the data community, and what skills they're learning. So we're seeing that Python still remains the top programming language out there at the moment, over and above R and other typical software application development languages. Agile software development practices make the top 32%. So basically what we're saying here is that all of the data roles that are being advertised at the moment, so companies that are looking for data engineering or data science with Python and R, what's underpinning that and the backbone is the requirement for candidates to understand and to put those things into practice or productionize what they're doing in an agile software development way. So that makes a top 5 requirement in skills required from businesses. From a visualization perspective, Tableau and Power BI are still on top at the moment from what we see, with Tableau the front runner, 42.83% of vacancies that we've seen on Perm, where there's been in visualization, there's been a requirement for Tableau, and then Power BI. That's what we can see right now. From a development or application development perspective, GitHub is pretty much a requirement for all businesses. They expect that application developers and software engineers and data engineers, will be using something like GitHub for their version control and ensuring that they follow those guidelines and methodologies for release, etc. So that's a requirement. And of course, then we look at cloud growth. AWS and Azure are still leading the way there. 43% of requirements that we're looking at the moment, there is a need for either AWS or Azure skills. So, I don't think much has changed, if I'm honest, in the last 6 months. In fact, this is very, very similar to what we talked about at Big Data London. Until we see something glaringly obvious coming out, which is a big change, then obviously we've got our finger on the pulse and our eye on the board. Most of this information, by the way, comes from public data, IT Jobs Watch, skills cited, previous 6 months of permanent requirements. So you can go and look at this stuff yourself, but we follow this trend all the time, and we try and plot it so that we make sure that we're educating customers and the data community as well. Right, so this is all about top tips and tricks. So our top tips for job seekers right now. So as we all know, everything has changed massively. If you're a business that hasn't really worked, had a remote working culture, then this will be a huge shock, and you'll be wondering what to do with, your workforce. That they might be furloughed or whatever the situation is, But for those who are actually looking for opportunities right now, what we would say is really, really spend some time on training and upskilling now. And where we believe the place to look and where to direct your efforts is training and upskilling around some specific technologies. And these specific technologies, there's quite a lot out there. I'm only mentioning a few here at the moment, but they are where there's an opportunity to do 2 to 3 week trials, which are free, and they offer certifications. So technologies like Alteryx, Workflow and Data Science Platform, Looker visualization, data stacks, they're really, really good place to start. So go to the sites, look for other opportunities where there are free trials that you can get involved with, and you can actually practice and upskill yourself. Definitely work on your SQL. We're always being asked for candidates who have got really, really strong SQL. So keep practicing on that. One of my passions is when you're a job seeker, it's all about personal brand. And when you're working and you're under pressure to get things done, you don't often have a lot of time to make sure that things like your LinkedIn profile is up to date. It's very relevant with the skills that you have and with the strongest skills that you have, and that's actually listed on your LinkedIn profile in the relevant areas. Are the keywords in your profile up to date? Have you joined groups which are relevant to the communities of people that you share your skills with, etc.? Have you asked recently for any testimonials from your network? That's really, really important. We have actually, live case studies where we've spoken to previous candidates and we've said to them about this, and they've reached out for a testimonial, and off the back of that, of landing a new opportunity. So it's definitely worth you doing that. Take time to write a blog and share it on LinkedIn, share it on the internet, share it with your friends and your network, and share your opinions. There's a ton of information out there at the moment that people are taking the time to share, and I think it's worthwhile you commenting on that as well, and also sharing the information. Revamp your CV. There'll be some useful links at the bottom of the Prezzo for your assistance. So good time to look at that. And there's some great online CV builders out there that will help you. I mean, we could obviously help with stuff like that, but there are some good online CV builders out there, and there'll be some links at the back end of this presentation. Top tips for businesses right now: spend time on the workforce planning and the re-engineering of your teams. As I mentioned before, capability is really important. Understanding what skills you have in your organization, looking at what training is available, drive some efficiency, testing technology, new technology, taking advantage of those vendors that are out there who offer these free, 2-week trials. If you can bring that into your business quite easily, it's a great thing to look at the moment to drive some efficiency and to get things done much quicker and better, which will set you up with a platform, I think, to springboard from when the opportunities arise when we come out the back of this pandemic. All of those areas in workforce planning are important as each other, but there will be some there that you have the more time to spend on to move forward. And utilise internship programs. Now is a great time. The students are still studying. They'll be finishing up their MScs this year. They'll be looking for placements. They're very, very low cost. They're very effective. And some of the things that you can get from students, there's data science internship programs like the one we run called Nurture, where they productionized models coming off the back of that at very, very low cost. And everybody who participates in internship programs, there's normally an included benefit there. Some useful links. There are links here for market data and wellbeing, LinkedIn webinars for everybody. There's a CV builder there, labour market challenges report for companies and people that like to find out a bit more information where we go. Some of the things obviously we focused on with wellbeing around psychological stress and your response to COVID-19 situation. Brilliant information to help you get through this pandemic, how to sleep well in these times, because that can be difficult for some of us. And of course, coping with loss, which unfortunately that happens. But there's some information there, and you'll be able to see those at the iansmith.group useful links page. That's me done. I think I've come up to about 15 minutes, Andy, so I hope that's all right. And any questions, happy to answer. And thank you very much for listening.
Hi, Jez. Yeah, thank you for that. So, we do have a couple of questions that have been sent in. And the first one is, what are the 2 to 3 mistakes you're seeing taking place right now that might put organisations at a disadvantage when we actually come out of this? So, are there things that people are doing that is, setting them up for failure, as it were, I suppose?
I think, as a business owner myself, and I think reacting quite fast. So those that are contemplating taking a bit of time to wonder what's going to happen over the next month or two, I think that could potentially be a mistake. For us, it was all about making very, very quick decisions to make sure that the business was as robust as possible to get through this period. And I also think that, not being naive about how much extra effort we have to make to get through this, it's very, very clear that 150% of effort right now will probably get you 50% of what you had before. So, look at those costs, lock them down, make quick, firm decisions, be decisive, be positive, and keep your team engaged throughout this period if you have furloughed anybody. Because I honestly believe that, and I do believe when we come out of this, there's going to be an amazing amount of opportunity for everybody.
Okay, that's great. So what I'd like to say as well is that there were some great links in that presentation, and for anybody who may have joined this session a little bit later, maybe after Jez had started speaking, this session will be available on demand almost instantly after we finish. So if you want to click on it and go back and see those links, or see the first little bit of the presentation, that will be easily possible once this is finished. Following that, I would like to introduce our next speaker, Susan Walsh. Please take it away. Oh, Susan, I think you might be on mute. Yep.
There's always one. Had to be moved. There's always one. Right, let's try again. How's that looking?
We're good.
Perfect. All good.
Fabulous. Okay, so yeah, thank you, Andy, for having me on. This is my first time doing anything with Big Data London. So I thought I'd just tell you a little bit about myself if you don't know who I am. Talk about data quality. I like to call it dirty data. So we'll talk about what that is, the importance of why you should have data quality, some survival tips for you, and then also just no matter who you are in the organization, I'm going to give you some tips that you can check your own data to check the quality of it, and then just a little summary at the end. So who the hell is the classification guru, I hear you ask? You may have seen me on LinkedIn, you may be connected with me, or you may just be wondering, where have I come from? So I am relatively new to the data world. I started my career in blue chip FMCG and then decided that wasn't for me. So I did what everyone does, right? I went and opened a shop in Guildford. That didn't really work out. That was a bit expensive. So after that, I really just needed a job. And so I found an online ad for some data classification work for a spend analytics company. So I spent 5 happy years there and managed and grew a team and trained them and made sure that everything was great with spend classification. But I noticed an opportunity when I was there to offer a service that was just based around the data quality and the data classification, not the fancy expensive software that gives you really nice charts and things. Just good old-fashioned cleaning of data, which, let's face it, most people don't enjoy. So that tended to be within the procurement industry, and just by chance, I've been a lot more active on LinkedIn, talking about personal branding within the last year, and a lot of the issues that I was sharing and talking about were picked up by the data community. So that's kind of led me to a wider audience, and I've been welcomed with open arms. So let's talk about dirty data. It makes it sound a bit more exciting because I know it can be a bit of a boring subject. It's different things to different people. So my experience of working with data will be very different to yours. We might be working in very different areas, but at its very basic level, it's anything that's incorrect. If we look at it in more detail, it can be a number of things, such as misspelled words, incorrect descriptions, missing product codes or codes, data in the wrong columns, no standard units of measure. So you might have liters, LTRs, Ls. I'm pretty sure some of you are nodding your head away right now. Currency issues, you may have multiple currencies in the one column, formatting issues, and of course, there's always going to be duplicates. So we all know about these things, but why is it important to have data quality? The first thing I would say is it saves you time fixing your dirty data. If you have good data, you won't be spending time fixing it. It can be really costly to rectify. If you're not looking after it properly, you could end up having to get in someone to fix it or rework something, and it takes a lot of time out of your schedule. It's going to affect your decision-making process, particularly within spend data classification. If the data is incorrect, procurement teams will be buying products based on the wrong information, which means they might have too much or too little of something, or they can't get better rates when they're negotiating. But it's not just procurement that it affects, it's every single area of the business. It's from sales to marketing to finance to procurement to production to forecasting. So there might be some dirty data and sales are making a forecast that they're going to hit X target. Marketing use what they've got to promote that product. Finance then say, hang on, you're not hitting your targets or your budget here. Production are going, wait, we can't make enough of this, or we've got too much now. That throws your forecasting out the window. And then procurement's like, why are we buying this, or why did we buy this? It also impacts things like software implementation. So if you've got a new ERP, a new CRM, some new visualization software, if you don't have quality, accurate data when you install that software, you will not have the buy-in from your teams. So they will be resistant to actually use the software. They'll think it's wrong, that it's incorrect, where it's actually not the software, it's the data. Which means further down the line, you may either have to spend significant cost fixing that data for people to use the software, or you might even have to abandon that software, which you've spent a lot of money trying to implement. And finally, it makes your life more difficult, and nobody wants that. So working from home, it makes it even more difficult. How can you get through this time working from home when you might not have the same tools that you have in the office? You might have just your laptop screen. You might not have access to some of the software, or it might be a really bad network connection. So first thing I would say is get to know your data. Look at it constantly. What that means is that you will be able to recognize when there's something wrong. If you can, try avoid working with large files. They can be slow, they can crash, freeze, and you can even lose some work. It can be really frustrating. If you can, use pivot tables to aggregate that data. It might just be easier to work with. If you have to, and I wouldn't normally recommend this, but under the circumstances, I would say this is a good option. Split your files if you have to by a department, a category, or a region, so that when you put it back together, it'll work, basically. And save regularly, and make sure your autosave's on. How many times I can't tell you that I've thought autosave has been on and it's not, so it's really important to check. And keep your data consistent. It doesn't matter where you're working, in an office, at home, on the moon, your data should be consistent. And the way that you can manage that is communicating with your colleagues. Now, it might be a case that you used to be able to just shout across the desk, oh, what do you do for this? Now it might be a quick email or a Slack message or something like that, but it's really important to keep those channels of communication open so that you're all working to an agreed set of standard terms and processes. And you might want to create a document so that everyone can have that in their home. And it will be different for every organization, but it might just be, if A equals B, then it's C. And it really makes a difference. And really try to not work on the same file. I think it's going to be a lot harder to manage that when everyone's working from home, and it might not be as obvious when other people are also in the file. But again, if you're communicating with your team, then there's less chance of that happening. And it's really, really, really important to maintain your data. So again, if you get to know your data, you'll be looking at it on a regular basis, and then you'll know that something isn't quite right, and you'll be able to correct it as you see it. This means that you don't get to the end of a month, the quarter, the year, and you have a large piece of work to do. And if you are struggling, get some help. Speak to your teammates, speak to your manager. If you have to, get a third party in. Just don't let the data quality be compromised because you're working at home. More than ever, it's really important to make sure that it's accurate. So next I wanted to show you some little tips and tricks that I use. Now I tend to use visualization and modeling software, and I know we all use different types. So I've kind of transferred this to Excel, which means that you can use this, and then you can take this and use it in your own visualization software, which will be better. Excel's not ideal, but we're all on an even playing field when we're using that. So if you take your data and create a pivot table, you'll find that everything just comes into one column. So it's not the best way to start looking at your data. What I would advise is to change it to a tabular form so that you've got it depends what your data is, but in this case it's supplier, name, and then you've got your classifications to the right. It means it's really easy to spot when something's out of place. So for example, here with breaks, They're a food services company, but we actually have some transportation, some warehousing and mini storage classified against it. So that shouldn't be there. Now it gets a bit tricky because you have to flip between tabs to then correct the data. So a really good way to work around this is to select a new window, click Arrange All, and then I would recommend arranging vertically. It'll then look like this. And that means that you can have your pivot sheet on one tab, one screen, and your raw data on the other side by side. So you can pick up that error in the pivot table, you can amend it in your raw data tab, and then once you've done a few, you can refresh the data in the pivot tab so that you're not repeatedly going over the same incorrect things. And that's just a really quick and simple way that you could check your data, and it could be classification here, it could be GL codes, it could be if you've got employees that need to be assigned to something, making sure they're in the right place. There's a number of different ways you can use this. And also you might find that there are certain suppliers or departments that have a huge number of rows. So you can separately copy all that information into a new tab, create a new pivot table from that, and just look at that in isolation. Sometimes that helps if there's a huge number of rows. So that is my tips and tricks. I know it's a lot to take in. If you can take anything away from this, it's that I'd like to say, you know, accurate data is absolutely critical, more than ever. And there are no shortcuts to this. You can't press the magic button. You can't use software to do it. You have to go through it manually at the beginning to make sure that it's right. Get to know your data. So look at it on a regular basis and maintain it. It will save you hours and hours in the long run. And it makes your life easier. And we all want that, especially now. So one thing to think about before I go is think of your data as having a quote. So it should be consistent, it should be organized, it should be accurate, and it should be trustworthy. So that's my presentation. There's been a lot going on there. You can find more resources on my YouTube channel, and you can get in touch here or on LinkedIn, and I'll be happy to send over the slides or any questions that you might have. Thanks very much.
Thanks, Susan. Yes, so I've got a couple of questions for you. Let me have a quick look and pick some of them. So one saying, can we save the file to the laptop rather than work from the network? Is that
no? Only if you've lost the connection to the network, and you have to as a last resort, but that then creates multiple copies of the same file, and then you have no idea what the truth is anymore.
Okay, so no. I see. Somebody pointing out that by plugging coat, you're still selling clothing in the. Thank you for that. Have you got? To what degree do you think domain expertise is essential to perform data quality and classification activities? Have you got?
So, data quality, what I've just showed you in Excel, anyone could do, from the cleaner to the CEO. And I think the most important thing is that data quality is accessible to everybody, and we should all take responsibility for it. It's not Bob in the corner's job to look after it. You know, we're all responsible for it. In terms of classification, that takes blooming years of classifying things to really hone in your skills. When I had a team, it was 3 to 6 months just to get the basics nailed. So it's a specialized skill.
Okay. And let me have a look. And is there any? Can you perform data cleansing that's too large to export to Excel? It's something that's common.
Me personally.
Yeah.
Oh,
no.
yeah.
How can you? Yeah.
Oh,
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
So again, it's going to be things like can you split that up by department or category or division or by employee, looking at a way to put it into smaller chunks. Now, I would always say usually that you should always look at your data as a whole to make sure that you get that consistency, but we're in unusual times. It's just not going to be possible. So try and look at logical ways that you can slice up your data without causing too many problems. So if you just took A to Z or A to M and then N to Z, that's going to cause more problems than if you took a category or a division.
Okay. Well, I'm just looking on at the time, so I think we're going to move on now to Dave, who's here to talk to us more about working in these sort of unprecedented times, keeping your social distancing, working from home. So Dave's an expert in unified communications and that kind of technology rather than data. So it's going to be very interesting to hear his take about how our teams can work better together. So thank you, Dave.
Okay. Thanks very much. I presume everybody can see the screen and hear me. I'm sure somebody will shout on the side chat channel for presenters if they can't. So it's very much my first time of working with big data as well, and I guess my link from this comes through working with Andy and events previously in his previous life. So like Susan, who am I? So I'm Dave Mailer. I'm one of the directors and a principal consultant at 4C Strategies Limited. And we're an ICT consultancy that focuses very much upon infrastructure and communication and collaboration. And I guess it's that bottom bullet point, communication and collaboration, which is come very much to the fore in the past month. And I guess we expect it to stay there as time moves on. So I wanted to focus a little bit in the sort of 10 to 15 minutes that I've been given to looking at the subject of how to work effectively in a COVID-19 world. Now, there's 4 topics that I think I'll come to in this. One is effective business continuity processes. Now, it could be argued that we're already in business continuity and that bit's done and ticked, but there are still things we need to think about, which I'll come back to. A little bit of a think about what are the correct tools for the job, I guess the technology aspects of it. Then look a little bit about I'll call it safeguarding and staff welfare. It's not all about technology. It's not all about doing the job in the way we used to. It's not all about managing staff and getting outcomes and getting deliverables. There is a real welfare aspect to this, and I think it's in all of our interest to take account of that if we want our businesses and our jobs to still be here when we come out of it. And finally, to look a little bit about cybersecurity, and then we'll look at some things that are the same aspects of security that we've always had to consider. And then there are some elements which maybe are a bit new and some of us haven't really had to consider in the past. So first of all, looking at the effective business continuity aspect of it, I think the really key aspect here is that most businesses have taken a look at, and I would hope most businesses, whether businesses you work in or some of you may be business owners as well, you've looked at how you enable business continuity for protection against loss of technology and systems, loss of location if you have a flood or a fire in your main business premises, and loss of staff if you have some event that means that your staff can't come to work or you lose them. I don't think any of us had really conceived of a scenario where all 3 of those things are happening at the same time. Many of my clients are finding real difficulty, not so much that they have lost their systems, but that they haven't got access to them, and that if there are issues and technical problems, their IT staff haven't got the access that they need to bring them online and back online as quickly as they did. Clearly, most of us have lost access to our normal working locations. I guess most of the people on the call here wouldn't be under the considered to be key workers who have to be in their place of work. We really all ought to be thinking about how effectively we can do the job from a location where we can socially distance and take some responsibility. And then finally, it's loss of staff. We're probably one of the sectors that will suffer least from this. Ironically, the key worker sectors are those that are suffering the most because their staff are actually out there and they're exposed. Last week, I believe London Transport was running with 30% of its staff unavailable through either illness or having to self-isolate because a family member was showing symptoms. We're probably in the scenario where we have been able to social distance much more at a much earlier stage, and hopefully that means that in the short to medium term anyway, we shouldn't have the same staff issues that some of the key worker sectors are going to have. So a couple of things really about looking at business continuity, and some organisations are taking a view that it's too late, it's happened now, we've just got to do the best we can. But I think we've gone through the first 2 to 4 weeks of home working. I think I've been home working. This is about week 3.5 from my perspective. It's working after a fashion, but there's still ways in which we can improve it and we can try and optimize. The important thing, I think, when looking at that is to focus upon service delivery, on what you actually have to do for your customers. A common mistake I find people often make in terms of business continuity is thinking that in a disaster situation or a failure situation, things have to run as normal. That's not necessarily the case at all. One of the conversations I'm having with a number of my clients is how they deal with their inquiries and contacts into their business. In some instances, all of their frontline call answering staff can work from home. In other instances, they can't. But usually they've got some staff who can take those calls. So it's perfectly acceptable to look at your business continuity process as being, well, we'll just make sure those calls get answered, but actually it'll be somewhere else. It won't be in the same location that we used to. I think it's important to think outside the box in this. You might want to work with partners. You might want to work with competitors, people who you wouldn't normally have seen as being people that you might support you. I think the world is a very, very different place. And this sort of forum, I'm sure there's lots of people who are competitors on this webinar who equally can work together and support each other. I'm a member of a consultants group who, we compete with each other, but right now we're giving each other a lot of support because we're having the same challenges. And then finally, don't forget about the recovery processes. It's very easy to get into a routine of getting things working and optimized for how we are at the moment. But one day things will, I hesitate to say go back to normal. I suspect there will be a new normal, but don't forget how you're going to come out of this. And there are going to be impacts about trying to move back to normal working. The interesting question at the beginning about what are some of the mistakes people are making. I think one of the mistakes some people are making is thinking that the post-COVID-19 world will be the same as the pre-COVID-19 world. I think many businesses will be in a different shape. Many business processes will be very different because I think we'll all have got used to the fact that we don't all have to go to a single office location to work. And we do not have to, in many businesses, bring our customers to us in order to engage and transact business with them. So that's something else to think about in terms of your business continuity processes, because they might need to support a different business after this. Moving on to the correct tools for the job. It's not just technology. I think most of us on this call, we're probably settled into a working from home environment. And I think it is really, really important to have an appropriate working environment at home. But we have to acknowledge that that's as far as is possible. We haven't all got the luxury of having a dedicated room we can use as a study. Many of us have got multiple home workers working in the home at the same time and have got competition for space. So it's really a case of doing the best you can and something that you feel comfortable with. Clearly, it seems obvious to say now, but everybody who can and should work from home should have a laptop. That's patently obvious, isn't it? But many organisations that wasn't the case in the past, and many staff are working on desktop computers. I think that's something we might see a major change out of this at the end, so that people can move to home working a lot more with a lot more agility than the past. Screens. if you've got the ability to set up at home with multiple screens, I'm sure most of the people on this call, because of the nature of your work, I'm pretty sure you're probably geared up in this way anyway. But I've certainly found it's taken me 3.5 weeks to get a comfortable situation. I've dug some old screens that we had out of the attic at home, and I've got a reasonable setup at home, which is a combination of work, 4C equipment and personal equipment, and it works reasonably well. Access is important. You need the right access to potentially a VPN to get back to your home networks, to whatever software you might need, and to cloud services. I've found a lot of businesses suffering with software, especially where they are moving to asking staff to work on personal machines because they haven't had laptops for all staff. Yes, you might have to go out and buy some licensing. I think you'll find most providers are reasonably flexible at the moment, in that they'll increase your license count for a temporary period on the understanding that you're not going to be actually consuming that number at the end of it. And access to appropriate and applicable cloud services. The more of your services are in the cloud, the better. But recognise what people have to do, and try and make sure that they're enabled to do that. One classic example, I won't quite name and shame, but a major telecommunications company in the UK had taken the view that because they want to push people towards their own products, they barred their staff from having access through their networks to other very, very common communication and collaboration tools. That has now become a major problem, because I've had a couple of instances where people are saying that it's just too hard to deal with them, and they'll deal with their competitors. So be flexible in this world. Collaboration tools themselves, things like Slack was mentioned earlier, the sorts of things we can use to keep in touch with people, to message, to try and create that virtual working environment are good. I think we're seeing a huge uptake, particularly of Microsoft Teams at this minute in time, from anybody who uses Office 365 subscriptions. If you are an Office 365 user as an organisation and not using Teams, then subject to your licensing, it may well be that you're paying for it anyway. So have a look and think about using it. And then finally, meetings, conferencing tools. I think the observation I'd make on that is try, if you have influence over a business, to try and introduce a little bit of consistency where you can, and have your staff using a common set of meeting and conferencing tools, because they're not all the most intuitive things to use. And if you're having, as I am, 5 or 6 conference calls a day, if I'm doing that on the platform I use, then yeah, I know that inside out. But if I'm having to participate because the host is using something different all the time, then every call we're wasting time, we're learning. So at least within your organisation, try and introduce a bit of consistency. Next item is safeguarding and staff welfare, and this is a combination of both, corporate and employer responsibility and personal responsibility as well. We all have a responsibility to look after ourselves, and the big risk here is a risk of isolation, and we all need to make an effort to try and reduce that isolation and try and maintain some of the team spirit that we had before. And Jez made a really, really strong point earlier that this should include also any furloughed staff. You want those furloughed staff to come back to you when this is all over, and you don't want them to feel that they've been excluded from your organisation. In which case, there's a high risk that you're going to lose them as loyal employees. So some of the things that we need to look at there are allow flexible working hours, and indeed maybe choose flexible working hours. If there are certain hours during the day, if you have kids at home, and if we all know that supermarket opening hours have been reduced. If you need to get out to the shops, if you need to do things, then change the working day, work flexibly in a way that fits yourself. Just make sure that your employer, your co-workers and your customers are aware of that. And I'm sure you're not going to find anybody who has any objection to that. And I'm sure we'd all work more effectively and more efficiently if we work sort of an hour and to the hours and a working pattern that fits us. Make a really conscious effort to have some informal contact with your colleagues from work. So even if you're not actually working with them on a project or an assignment, have a virtual coffee break once a week or twice a week. They'll be really awkward to start with. And you'll think, why are we doing this? It's a waste of time. But if the first one's only 5 minutes and the second one's 10 minutes and the third one's 15 minutes, that's fine. I think you need to make a really strong effort to do that, and don't give up on the first attempt, and you will find that they are beneficial. Use collaboration tools, as I said earlier, and if your employer's not giving you those sorts of things, then use social media. I'm going to come on to the security slide in a moment, and there are certain things we need to think about that. But yeah, utilizing WhatsApp and Facebook Messenger to improve communication with your colleagues is great. Use video where you're able to. Within 4C, I've struggled for years to get people to use the video. We've had that capability, and people, I've just had a reticence to use it. With COVID-19, we basically brought in a rule saying when people are at home, they have to use video on internal meetings, and we're now all doing it, and we all genuinely are finding a benefit from it. So use it. Again, force yourself to use it. The first few times might be a bit awkward. And finally, a much softer aspect is every now and again, ask people how they are. You're not picking up those signs that you would if you were in the office. So yeah, ask people. And when you're asked, be honest. If you are feeling down, if you are struggling with anything, be honest with your colleagues. Everybody, I believe, in this environment is keen to help and wants to bring everybody together. And the summary point at the bottom of that slide, it's not mine. I've stolen that. Somebody said it to me, but I think it's great that in all your dealings with other people in this whole thing, if you just use the mantra, be kind, you won't go far wrong. And just to wrap up very quickly, because I'm conscious we want to save some time for a general Q&A at the end. We do need to think about security in our COVID-19 working arrangements, and it is a little different to normal situation. The first items on the slide there, access to centralized systems and cloud services, well, they shouldn't be any different to your normal working in the office. But depending on how you're accessing those services, there may be some differences. I think when we get to device security, there's an element that's really important is if you are using or you're allowing your employees to use personal devices when working at home, remember that all of that effort that you as an organization might have put into device security, or the comfort that you had as an employee that your device was secure because your company's IT department was looking after it, may be swept away instantly. There is a risk when you're working online sort of 8+ hours a day, that if your device isn't secure, isn't running the latest patches, hasn't got up-to-date antivirus software, then there's a risk to both you, if you're using a personal device, and your employer's data. So go through that thought process. If you're responsible for staff and employees, if you've got home workers, it's something you really need to work through if you're allowing them or encouraging them to use their own devices. If it's your personal device, yeah, think about your own safety, because you're probably putting software on that device and doing things with it that you would not normally. Conference security. There's starting to be quite a bit of in the press about conference security. I think the FBI put something out about risks and safeguarding in schools using Zoom last week. People not protecting their passwords, running insecure conferences, which allow people to, if nothing else, the simple hack is that somebody's got hold of the conference ID, you don't change it for every meeting, and people just join the conference and sit there in the background muted. And they can be listening to and accessing whatever information you're sharing. So think about it. It's another reason as an organization to try and mandate a platform that you're happy with and that you can provide the guidance. We're unfortunately seeing a lot of phishing scams coming out, people purporting to be somebody they're not, trying to help people, whether it's with personal aspects or whether it's with work aspects during COVID-19. just be alert. Nothing different to that we should be doing, but there are a lot of new attacks and new phishing scams going on at the moment. And then finally, social media. We get asked a lot, well, my employer isn't providing any collaboration technology. Is it okay to just use social media? And the answer to that is it depends. Some social media, WhatsApp, the actual integrity of the data in transport is pretty good. It's all encrypted. It's the arguments there are with people like the FBI and Scotland Yard who can't get at that data. But you do need to be very careful about does that mean you're storing data on a mobile device? What security have you got in place on that mobile device if it gets lost? Is it just a 4-digit PIN, or is it something more strong? So whilst social media is certainly okay for the personal interaction, if you're going to use it or you want to encourage its use as an organisation for business purposes, go through that thought process as to how secure is it and what are you allowing to be transported over it. So that was a very rapid run through. I've tried to keep, I think there's just over 5 minutes at the end for questions. So thanks very much for your attention, and any questions?
Thanks, Dave. Yeah, no, that was great. I've got questions. It looks like there's questions where all three of you may be involved at some point. So might be best to turn the mics off just in case it comes to you. First one's to Stu or Dave. Do you have any recommendations for transporting data securely if you're unable to set up a secure FTP or SFTP?
Dave, do you want to do the you're probably the expert. I mean, I know what I do, but I don't know if that's right.
I think clearly encrypted, if you have to transport data and you have to put it on a memory stick, encrypted memory sticks are, I would say, stating the obvious, but not always. And I'll be honest, I don't carry an encrypted memory stick now. I used to, when it was a preferred means of exchange of data, but I don't now. So if I found that was the only way of getting some data from somebody, I'd have to think very carefully. I think it's what's going to happen, and it's what happens to the data when it's been transferred, which is the really important thing. It's relatively easy to look after physical media to get it from A to B if you're careful with it. The real risk is what happens to it after the data has been taken off it, and making sure that it gets cleaned. If it's your memory stick or your media, that you get it back and that you're happy that it's been cleaned or wiped. Ultimately, common sense is a good start to all these things.
Perfect. Okay. And this one's for you, Jez. Most companies are reducing their workforce. Can you give an example of a company or companies who are upskilling their workforce in the data space during the crisis? You don't have to say their name, maybe a description if it's.
I was just wondering about that, actually. Yeah, I mean, bearing in mind what's happening, there's a ton of research required right now. There's a ton of equipment required right now. There's a ton of supply chain that needs supporting. So actually, if we look at Big Pharma are very busy at the moment. Even med device companies are extremely busy right now. So medical device companies have got big programs on at the minute. They're not turning them off. The Big Pharma side, they are all bolstering up their data engineering and data science teams at the minute to do research. And then actually, to be fair, even some universities I've seen that are recruiting because they're looking at how they can support the pharma industry. Banks, I've seen some banks. I've seen, I mean, to be fair, actually, it's across industry. Farmers where I've seen it really kick at the moment, but I expected that anyway. You just gotta think about, what type of industry is very busy at the moment, and don't forget that data underpins everything that's going on in an organisation right now. And if it's not, then it should be. But that's what we're seeing.
Yeah. Okay. And this question was meant for Dave, but it might be interesting as like a final question. If everybody could give their take on it before we wrap this up. Do you think that this, and I think they're referring to, the situation we're in now with COVID-19 and everything, is a complete reset for most companies? So do you think that the working world as we know it now is ever going to be quite the same as it was before this crisis. So I guess if we could go Dave, Jez, and Susan in that order, just in terms of your opinions on that.
Okay, I think my opinion is that yes, the world has changed. It's swept right to one side at the moment, and it'll come back to some degree, but it isn't going to go back to where it started. I think a lot of estates directors are looking at the amount of real estate they've got and thinking, hang on a minute, it's all been standing empty for 3 months. I don't have to have this much, and that's across all sorts of sectors. Believe it or not, I think that's going to hit the health sector as well. I think a lot of what we do in the health sector, we won't need to go back to face-to-face direct consultation with our clinicians unless there's a physical activity needs to be undertaken. So there's going to be changes across everywhere, and yes, that's why I think we need to plan for a different world at the end of it.
Jez?
Yeah, I agree with a lot of what Dave said. I mean, for us, what I'm thinking is this is get prepared for a huge cultural transformation. This is forcing a different way of working with remote working. It's showing businesses that there's a way that they can reallocate budget from fixed cost office space, stuff like that. And also what's great about this is it's massively promoting well-being. Because I don't know about everybody else here, you don't always have to get up so early in the morning. You've got time, a little bit more time at the start and the end of the day. Some people are actually feeling much better from that. They're much more productive for shorter spaces of time. It's showing people that actually you don't need to be in the same room as someone else just to get the job done. In fact, you can be more productive. So definitely there'll be a huge change, I think, across the whole landscape of how we do business in the future. That said, I think it's still important for everybody to get together and do what they need to do once or twice a week, maybe if they're going into the city or whatever. But it would definitely push change, and it's actually forcing us to use some of this great technology that we got as well, which is brilliant.
Yeah. From my point of view, I think that it's really going to start to shine a light on companies' data quality, data processes, and data governance and all that good stuff. And it can only be a good thing that people start to take it more seriously and engage with it. I think now more than ever, everyone's going to be working with more data, and they're going to realize that, it's a collective responsibility to maintain it.
Cool. Well, I'd like to take this opportunity to say to all three of you, thanks very much for your time, and thanks for the work you put into 3 excellent presentations. Also, thank you to everybody at home. Thank you for coming and watching this, our first webinar. We will be back after Easter with some more. We'll release those details. There's a section on our website now with webinars on there for you to register to. As I mentioned before, you can pick up the recording of this straight away afterwards. And from us, from all the presenters and from all of us at Big Data London, have a happy Easter, happy Passover, and enjoy the next few days whilst unfortunately staying inside. So thanks very much, and we'll see you very soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.